Welcome to Season 8 of the FarrCast, bringing you insights into Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It is the 9th day of January 2025. We're in Season 8 here of the FarrCast as we bring insiders to try and help explain what in the hell is going on in the world each week. We cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. We start with Wall Street every week. I like the young, bright guys, but I typically keep them for this third segment, young, bright ladies for the third segment. I like to hear from the experienced folks in our first segment here on the FarrCast. As we're looking at the economic and marketscape at the beginning here at the end of this second week of January, markets have not had a good start to January. Markets haven't had a really good time from Christmas Eve on. Share prices has become lower, and bond yields have gone higher. And where I want to start with my first guest this morning is the bond market still smarter than the stock market? You see, if you've done this as long as I have, and our first guest, who is Jim Iuorio from TJM Institutional Services, basically the voice of the Chicago floor for over a decade, frankly. One of the smartest guys out there, a wonderful trader, but gets this stuff. I mean, when I tell you he gets it, this is one of these guys where it's just a part of his genetic DNA. He doesn't have to sit and think and study, but really the markets the way normal human beings do. He just kind of lives them. He lives and breathes them, and they're a part of him. So I looked at that 10-year Treasury get up to 470. I mean, that means the yield's going up, ladies and gentlemen, and the prices are going down. That means that mortgage rates are going up, borrowing rates are going up, credit card adjustable rates, revolving debt and credit is all getting more expensive. After the Fed cut rates, we've got markets that are still very high on a relative basis. We've got positive in general economic numbers, but for the debt. Is the bond market sending a message? Jim Iuorio, welcome back and Happy New Year. Is the bond market sending a message to the rest of us that Houston, we have a problem?
I think there's no question about it. Well, thank you, by the way, for that intro, because at first you called me old. You couched that with experience, but then you came back nicely, and thank you very much. I appreciate that a ton. So I think we're kidding ourselves.
Wait a minute. No, hang on. We got to go to old because Perugian and Polcari and Insana are all about a month older. I think you're actually younger than I am, aren't you?
This is the year I turned 60, so I am younger than the three of you, right?
Yeah, you are. Yeah. We're 63, and we turn 64 in a couple of months. So you're a puppy. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll take that then. Okay, so I think we're kidding ourselves if we think there's any story that is bigger and more important than the story in yields. Of course, AI is a story, quantum computing is a story, but right now at this moment in time, the story is bond yields going through the roof and why. So, okay, let's break it down as to why it might be. So at first it was like, okay, Powell's too easy. He's going to reignite inflation. Is that the case? Yeah, that's probably on the list of why they're going higher. Secondly, and third are the policies of Donald Trump. You can say, okay, if he's going to institute tariffs, that could be inflationary, that could be a problem. Or, which I like to lean to, is his policies, particularly as it relates to corporate taxes, tax rates in general, deregulatory positions, are those going to spur aggregate demand in the short term before the supply side solutions that he's proposing can really catch momentum and fight inflation in the longer term. So I actually think 2025 is going to be a difficult time for risk assets. I'm not predicting any sort of 25% huge collapse. I just think they're gonna have a tough time. And the reason I'm not predicting that collapse is because there's still so much liquidity in the system that's legacy from the COVID mitigation strategy. There's still probably $2.5 trillion domestically sloshing around above trend that would have been probably 7 trillion globally. And I had dinner with a kid last night who is new in the business, and he was talking about Ripple. That's a cryptocurrency that's going through the roof. And I said, as long as we start seeing things like this, Ripple, And fart coin, yes. It is amazing to me that we have to say the words fart coin on actually sophisticated financial analytics, but it is something that is worth watching. The market cap of it shot through the roof. That means there's extra money in the system. So what I'm saying is that I don't like the stock market right here. I don't love it. Because bond yields, I think, are going higher, because inflation is staying elevated. By the way, I think the Fed the 2% inflation thing is nonsense. I think they actually want 2.6 to 2.8% inflation for the next 2 years. Any of that make sense? All of it makes sense?
Well, what you just said was really important. And what you just said, like what he said, ladies and gentlemen, harken back to a bunch of things we used to always watch and talk about that people don't watch and talk about anymore. He just talked about money supply. He just talked about liquidity. We used to cover M1 and M2. Those are measures of money supply. I know it's wonky, but those were headlines 20 years ago. Those were headlines under Greenspan's Fed. You had to watch the money supply. You had to watch what the Fed was doing on coupon passes and everything else. This might sound like it's old stuff to you, but these are fundamental economic principles. The money supply, when there's a whole lot of money out there, when you are awash in liquidity, it finds places to go. And it's finding places to go of what seemed to be to us adolescent, juvenile creations of these cryptocurrencies that are soaking up money that have no business, probably, in our opinion. I don't mean to speak for him, but he's nodding, so I am. This is silliness. So how do you reground yourself? Let's go back. We're saying Farr and Iuorio, because I'm agreeing with him, Farr and Iuorio are saying there are excesses in the market, that stock prices are coming down does not surprise us, that yields are going up as an indication of risk does not surprise us. We're not calling for anything apocalyptic, but when you see more danger evident, now this isn't a feeling, this is what the numbers are telling us, should these trends continue, and we see every evidence that they probably will. So therefore, how do you position a portfolio, Jim, in a world of NVIDIAs and Googles and Teslas and the old boring stuff like Pfizer and just the nuts and bolts companies that used to be the core of a lot of blue chip portfolios?
So I want to harken back to 1 month ago when we were on this show, and I said that I was selling out probably about 20% of my stocks just based on my normal yearly rebalancing to get my risk parameters back in order. And a month ago, I was still riding the high of, okay, Donald Trump's policies are so much more economically stimulative than the binary, and I was still a bull, and I did it anyway. So, and I look back at that and say, you're supposed to do that kind of thing, because one thing we didn't say is that even like there has never been a bifurcation of economic policies that was so disparate as it was in this election, as it was in this presidency that we're now experiencing, facing, looking up against the one that's coming in. So the question becomes, is the market scared of change? Yeah, the market's always scared of change, even if we're going toward a change of a good place. So how am I positioning myself? I rebalanced, okay, because I believe that the first half of this year is going to be somewhat weak. I'm not touching any of those big high flyers yet. I still have some positions in AI names, but they're small. I'm not adding to those at all. I think it's going to be a difficult time. What we saw in quantum computing, some of those stocks losing 50% just based on Jensen Huang's talk, that doesn't mean it's just based on Jensen Huang's talk. It means that there was too much positioning in there, and that's why you see those outside positions. Things I do like going into 2025 are energy, because I think that oil is going to go higher. I think that Donald Trump eventually will bring oil prices down, being a drill baby drill president. But more importantly, on the short end, will be aggregate demand based on corporate tax cuts. I like oil. I like things like platinum and palladium, because remember, a year ago, everyone was going to be driving an EV, and copper was outperforming those. Now I think that those subsidies are going to go away, and we're going to start celebrating the internal combustion engine again. Bang, what do you need? Platinum, palladium, the platinum metals group. Those things I think are going to do quite well. I don't like the Russell anymore, because I think rates are going to stay high, and the Russell hates high rates. I do like banks, because banks like a steep yield curve, and that's what they're getting right now. The average 2s to 10s, which is right now about 38, the average is 105 basis points. I think we will get back there because I think long end yields are going higher. I can't remember exactly what your question was, which is probably indicative of the age thing that we talked about 5 minutes ago, but I think I got most of it, right?
For not remembering the question, you actually
I,
got it. You
oh, good.
actually got it pretty well. And I'm going to come up with a bit of a confession here. I did both. Again, not because I was making a market call, but I was going through my portfolio. Of course, at the end of the year, as I do, this is my personal portfolio, ladies and gentlemen. And I make mistakes in that portfolio. I promise. On a regular basis, I make mistakes. Iuorio does too. Iuorio does
Amen.
too. If anybody who does this every day, you make mistakes. That's okay. What's not okay is if you make a lot more mistakes than things you get right. That's a problem. That starts to get to be very expensive. But I went through and I trimmed. And the other thing I did was I took losses for stuff where those are always harder to do because you wonder if you're just running out of patience and if you're actually going to force yourself to buy back in after the 31 days. But there's no reason for me to be sitting around paying capital gains taxes if I have losses I can take. And I can take them for 31 days and have a certain tax benefit. So I do that. The other thing I did was I took some pretty good profits. And I looked at one stock that I bought that's way down. I just added a new position in October, and I've added to it even again. It's a tech software kind of a company, and the damn thing keeps going down, Iuorio, and it's driving me crazy. That damn thing keeps going down. I did not catch the bottom. I'm still, certainly within, I don't know, 15 or 20% of the bottom. But God, you feel stupid. The damn thing was down, and you think, is there something wrong? What have I missed? Is there? So it's really hard, even on the other side, when it's going down, to continue to add, to sit on your hands and go, I'm not going to sell it. It's still cheap. Nobody's convinced me this thing isn't cheap, except the market doesn't seem to be convinced, and it keeps making it cheaper. What do you do then? And I got to go. I can't believe it. But this is one of our best segments we've ever done, I think.
No, I love it too. The thing is, when you're talking about investments and you believe in the tech story, which of course I believe in the tech story over the next 5 to 10 years, who wouldn't? That's where the growth is going to be. So the question we're asking ourselves is, are these companies that we're looking at now something that's going to be a part of it? And if you believe in your heart that the answer to that is yes, then I think you use the sell-off to start amassing a bigger position. This oftentimes, and I trade as an investor too, like with a 10-year time horizon. I have different portfolios that I trade at different timeframes. But I think that if you believe in that story and you ask yourself, is this company going to be important in whatever tech revolution is going to happen in the next 10 years? And the answer to that is yes, you stick with it.
Jim, I have one other word of warning for investors. And that is if you feel like you're making a rational, fact-based decision, check your facts, really rely on the facts, and ask yourself if you're really willing to change your mind and change your position if the facts support that. So often I see, and Jim, I'm sure you've seen this too, you'll see investors that have an emotional opinion. They have a feeling. They think the market's going to go down. They think the market's going to go up. They think this stock's going to fall apart. They think the price of oil is going to do X, Y, or Z. And then they cherry pick facts to support those emotional feelings. That's not solid reasoning. And when you begin to build the argument, based on your feelings, you can be led to a very expensive conclusion. So you've seen people do it before. Look, folks, if you're going to do facts, right?
Now, as far as the broad market goes, there's one last thing I want to say, and then we will go, is that the liquidity story is still a positive story. The rate story is still a negative story. Right now, I think the rate story is winning, is going to win. The liquidity story could come back, and I think that's where you use technical analysis broadly. So 60-50 is my level in the S&P. If we can settle a couple of days above that, I will think my thesis is wrong, and I will be long in. And I know that a lot of times investors don't like hearing about levels and technical analysis, and I'm sorry, but that's just the way that will indicate to me where I am wrong and when momentum and sentiment still is higher.
Gosh, I wish we had more time, because it's not only the rate and the liquidity, it is the emergence of AI, and it is the contributions of AI that look like they're going to be a positive. And I wish we could talk about the dynamics of one of those stocks that cannot be named in the Magnificent Seven that makes chips and is growing earnings in a remarkable way. And there doesn't seem to be like at least 3 years. You've got 3 years of visibility. So this is kind of powerful end of the market, and that doesn't seem to change to me either. Please come back, Jim. I got a lot more questions for you.
Thanks, Michael. Have a great day.
Happy New Year to Jim. Coming up, Dan Mahaffee. Boy, what will we ever find to talk about today with Mahaffee? Please stay with us.
Thanks for being with us this week. Now it's time to go to our political analyst, Dan Mahaffee, and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. Joining me now, as he does every week now in Season 8, Dan Mahaffee, and now in 2025. And the calendar just keeps clicking on. Dan, welcome back to the FarrCast.
Good morning, Michael. Thank you. Good to be talking with you.
Morning, pal. Here on the 9th, later this morning, we have President Carter's funeral at the National Cathedral. Security is ridiculously high. He has been lying in state at the Capitol building. It's been a very dignified, I think, very, very sincere showing of appreciation for at the very least, a life well lived. There are those who can criticize his political accomplishments, up or down. But I've never heard anyone, Dan, say anything other than President Carter had a generous heart. He cared about his country. He cared about his community. And he lived with great humility and, in general, great kindness. So maybe the peak of his career came well after the presidency of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
How often does that happen?
Yeah, and I think, too, if you look at the arc of his life as a naval nuclear officer on board a submarine, governor of Georgia, then we look through his presidency to the time he had afterwards with Habitat for Humanity, global democratic, small d democratic causes, election security around the world, his work to reduce tropical illnesses. I think no more a scourge of parasitic worms on Earth than Jimmy Carter and what he's done for people around the world. Look, if you have to say that the presidency of the United States was the low point of one's career, then what a remarkable life to be reflecting on, and an example of service, even if political leadership was not his forte.
No question about it. No question about it. So, Dan, funeral today. We get back to the process of government here. Speaker Johnson, as you predicted, retained his speakership. Not a lot of drama. I mean, little drama, but basically we moved on at the behest of President Trump. Now, did it unfold as you thought? And why did President Trump suddenly just decide he wanted to keep Johnson the way he did?
Well, look, a victory lap in a home office is a pretty short loop, so we can dispense with that. But there was no alternative. No one really wanted the job. No one really wanted someone else in the job. There were certainly those who wanted to get their pound of flesh, as it were, get their qualms known in the process, slow it down, make the little bit of a headache for Speaker Johnson. But there was no real concerted move to push him out. What we do see are some demands, particularly with regards to debt and deficits. The Freedom Caucus have certainly long seen this as an important area. There are other members of Congress who are looking at it too. Certainly we see markets reminding us that you can't ignore the debt and deficits, and neither are some of these members. And that's going to be a big issue as they try and craft, and that's what they're debating now. Is it one big reconciliation package? That's what the House is saying. Admittedly, Trump is looking at it and not as one big beautiful deal, but he's kind of seeing it as the House is the weakest link, and you have to go with what they claim is passable. So Johnson wants a reconciliation bill to be done. His goal, he says, is to have this all wrapped up by May, which is telling me to tell my friends on Hill, don't make any Christmas plans for 2025, because this is the kind of stuff that's going to go on just that long.
And it goes on and on and on. And give me your prediction on it. Do they get this thing resolved? Does it go away the way it always does after some and probably considerable irritation to the American public?
Yeah, Michael, that's actually a very good question because it's hard to predict one without what exactly the scope of this plan is, because you're throwing in everything from immigration to energy to tax cuts, where each of these members has something, a pet project or a pet cause they want to bring to heel to bring to the table, and that the whether that gets included is a big matter of these votes. Every measure that the past Republican Congress did with a narrow majority required Democratic votes to pass. They can't do that again with these priorities, so they're going to have to keep everyone on board, and that frankly becomes the hardest part.
You know, we've seen President Trump in his last administration become unpopular at a certain point, where his hold on Congress and other things slipped and got weaker. Now, he's had a practice session here. Can that happen again? Because in my opinion, I'm kind of torn on this, Dan, because politically, certainly President Trump can make some pretty serious gaffes at times that as soon as you start to alienate the voter, as soon as the American public starts to sour on you. Now, we see no signs of it now. And listeners, you might be saying, oh no, Trump's got as strong as hold as he's and it won't happen this time. Baloney. I've watched any year, any 6 months, the view of a politician can change dramatically. And if it does, the other politicians move all the way over to the other side of the boat as fast as they can because they want to stay with the voting public. So can Trump keep his hold for 4 years? And where is he vulnerable?
Look, Michael, that's a very good question. One, you always see a honeymoon period for any president, followed by a diminished popularity, the loss of political capital, whatever you want to say. Second, I think he comes in with perhaps even less of a honeymoon, even though his supporters have resoundingly supported him, that there is a growing element of dissatisfaction that was there and will continue to be there. The element, too, that has to be considered in all of this is, when do we move from rhetoric to action? When you see things like prices of gas or eggs or everything where the voter generally sees this as their pocketbook issues, when will there be sort of the dissatisfaction or questions that come if he can't make these promises fast enough? And then when do you hear, as we always hear, temperament? Is it pushing on Greenland or Canada or things like that also have the public saying it's just not in our nature to behave like that?
Let's stop and go there for a second. I mean, we've had our Tata Trudeau moment.
And for our Canadian listeners, also Tata Trudeau and au revoir Trudeau. You have to do both by law for covering Canadian matters.
Pardon. Okay, with my pardon out of the way. Trudeau seemed to have a pleasant and entirely unremarkable ministry as Prime Minister of Canada for 10 years. Was it 10 years? It seemed like a big nothing. No big problem, no big success, sort of there's the placeholder. Am I being overly critical?
No, I think if you asked, like, did he manage Canada well for an extended period? I guess you could say that. Economic metrics, though, you look, very little productivity growth in Canada, R&D spending down, military spending the lowest it's been. Canada's global influence, economically, politically, and militarily, you could argue, really diminished under Trudeau. And a big question now for him and his successor becomes that so much of Canada's economic and security position is now subsumed by its relationship with the United States, and that the future does raise very significant questions about Canadian sovereignty. And I don't mean that just as Trump joking, but what is Canada's vision for itself and its economic and political mission in the world? Because there's not been leadership on that from Trudeau.
Okay, Greenland become part of the U.S., Canada become part of the U.S. Is any of this going anywhere? And what's
I don't
Trump's
think it,
point in
yeah,
pushing it?
Trump's point in pushing it, I think part of it is distraction. I think part of it is a way for him to position himself with these global leaders before he takes office to shake things up a bit. Look, I would say done right, the acquisition of Greenland is one of the few smart things that you hear them actually talk about in a geostrategic and geoeconomic sense, given the importance of the Arctic and the minerals that are there. So at the end of the day, if you get to a more secure, more prosperous Greenland, no matter who controls it, our allies or us, it's a win. But the rhetoric, I think, is really to position himself among global leaders before he takes office. But look, some of these are legitimate concerns. The Panama Canal, too, for example. You don't want Chinese interests taking control of a strategic asset there. But you also have to acknowledge, too, that the Panamanians, by and large, have done a pretty good job of running it.
Okay. So do any of these things go anywhere? I mean,
I don't.
is this spinning the wheels and creating headlines? I mean,
It's
Greenland, Canada,
showmanship.
Panama,
It's
huh?
showmanship. It's back to the my Vince McMahon WWE model of how Trump sees politics. This is part of the intro build up before the match.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you get to be my age, and maybe you're older, you'll find that in the library of your mind there is now limited space, and being barraged with headlines all day long. One of my biggest jobs, and perhaps yours, is to sit here and go, do I actually have to pay attention to any of this crap? What do I need to pay attention to? Do I really have to pay attention to whether they're going to get this reconciliation thing or done or not? And what's the consequence? And will they go to the line? I don't know. But right now I'm thinking I'm not going to focus on it too much. Frankly, that's just my decision. I'll wait until it gets a little bit hotter in Washington, because right now it's just noise. Do I have to pay attention to Greenland or the annexation of Canada? Or no. Mahaffee's saying it's noise. So where am I going to focus? I'm going to continue to focus internationally. I'm not going to take my eye off of China. I've got to pay attention to what's going on with Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. And I certainly need to keep an eye on Israel and what's happening with Iran. Those hotspots matter. The price of oil right now matters. The yield on the 10-year Treasury matters. These are data points. That can actually shift the ground beneath my feet, and I need to watch closely and make sure that I'm well positioned and always defensively positioned. So we look to Dan to give us these insights and tell us where we have to pay attention. And he's given you a pretty clear message here. Dan, as we get through the inauguration, just give me your final word. How long does the Trump honeymoon last? And is there anything that really keeps you up at night now as we start this new administration? And I've got 30 seconds.
Look, I think the honeymoon lasts until you do feel the hit of tariffs, whatever form he wants to take. And those policies, that's actually what does keep me up at night. I know that there's so much that the president can do on trade policy unilaterally. And the hit that we would take from some of these tariff proposals would be wide-ranging across the economy.
I lied. Musk. I've got one more. Musk. I talked to somebody last night and said that this guy is so toast. Musk doesn't even see the bus of Trump that is heading right down him on a very narrow street with nowhere to go. Trump will get sick of him and Trump will run him over completely. And I'm like, I don't know. He's a pretty effective foil for Trump. And Trump's figured out how to use him pretty well right now. Maybe it's a stealing the spotlight. Give me your thoughts on Musk. And then
Elon will be useful to Trump until he isn't. We've seen that cycle many times of advisors and people who've been in that orbit. But it's kind of like become that movie with Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss. What about Bob? You're just wondering when is Trump going to get sick of him, or is Musk going to take over the family?
I think the new iteration would be What About Rudy? What About Rudy would be the new movie. I'm talking about it.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. HEROES' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about HEROES' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting HEROES as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. HEROES, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. Thank you for joining us on the FarrCast. And now, back to your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. I'm loving this FarrCast, Harry Jennings. Loving it. I thought Iuorio was as good as Iuorio's ever been. I thought Mahaffee...
And that's saying something when Jim Iuorio is never bad.
That was seriously good stuff.
Yeah.
Seriously good stuff. And Mahaffee, very insightful on it today. I mean, really, he's always good, and yet I thought this was great. I hope Josh Huminski doesn't screw this up. I mean, we got a good thing going here, Huminski. Huminski's on, ladies and gentlemen. He's looking at me right now. Don't think I'm talking trash behind his back. I'm talking trash in front of his face. Josh Huminski is Senior Vice President for National Security and Intelligence Programs, Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, Washington, D.C. think tank on transatlantic relations, U.S.-Russia relations, policy initiatives. He has his graduate degree with merit. He's smart, see, in war studies from King's College London. He did a dissertation on energy security and international relations. Undergraduate honors degree from University of Connecticut. I also attended University of Connecticut in Storrs for my graduate work. And he did a thesis project on U.S. civil-military relations. Josh, Happy New Year and welcome back to the FarrCast.
Happy New Year. Thanks for having me. And certainly no pressure to start the year with an introduction like that.
Yeah, right. Well, there's a lot of pressure here on the podcast universe, really. a lot of pressure. Though we added thousands of listeners last year. It was really remarkable. It was terrific year for the FarrCast. Please share us, ladies and gentlemen, on your social media. Keep it up. I'd love to have a couple thousand more. And, we do this really now as a great kind of a public service, and more or less that we've become addicted. I think at least Harry and I and Mahaffee, we've kind of started this and we don't know how to stop 8 years into it. So Josh, we just went around the country. We talked about President Carter. We talked about what's going on in the markets, and the Federal Reserve doesn't seem to know which direction to take. And after lowering rates are much higher. And now we're looking at around the rest of the world. I told folks just before you came on that I'm focused on these international hotspots, of course, with China, Israel, Ukraine, try and figure out what's going on there. I'm ignoring the annexation of Canada and Greenland and the canal. So, and then I saw, I don't even know if this was real yesterday or not, that President Trump wants to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of the United States, that he wants to change that name. Doesn't know why it has to be Gulf of Mexico. So with that as an intro, Josh, give us your hot spots. What should we be paying attention to? What has your total attention right now as we're getting into the beginning of 2025?
Well, I think for me, the interesting thing is just the sheer agenda setting power of the president right now. He's not even inaugurated right yet. And just by his statements and press conferences is able to redirect the world's attention. Prior to the new year, everyone was looking at what's going to happen with Russia and Ukraine. And then you just referenced in one press conference, he comes out and talks about buying Greenland from Denmark, or potentially using force or coercive measures to do so. And now everyone is talking about that. And so I think what you're looking at the international stage is a taste of things to potentially come, where the president is going to be saying things and setting the agenda at a very top level and it's going to grab a lot of attention. It's going to grab a lot of press. But what's going to be interesting to see is what happens behind the scenes. And I'll take NATO as a great example, something I'm paying a lot of attention to. He came out and said that he wants NATO countries, the 32 members, to spend 5% of their GDP. That is in excess of what even Poland is doing, which is 4.1% of GDP, and larger than what the United States is doing. 5% isn't really realistic for the 32 members.
What does the United States spend on NATO?
We're about 3.4%.
3.4%
GDP.
Okay.
And there are a number of countries, I think it's about 7, that are below the 2%, including Canada. Including
but when you
Italy.
talk about that 3.4%, you're talking about the largest economy in the world spending 3.4%.
Absolutely.
So 3.4% to us, think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen, 3.4% of your income compared to 3.4% of Bill Gates' income. Got it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
A great reference, a great way to look at it. But it is a measure of commitment to and obligations to the NATO alliance. So President Trump comes out and says, I want 5%. And of course, NATO countries like, that's incredible. That's unrealistic. We can't do that. But might settle for 3.5%, which is a much more viable proposition for a number of countries. And there are things you can do within the budgetary allocations. But I think what you're seeing is these hyperbolic statements that get a lot of attention and a lot of press on the international stage, and then the actual work and government and diplomacy negotiation happens behind the scenes. So I think you're already starting to see that, and that's what's happening on NATO defense spending. You're seeing that what's happening on U.S.-Canada, U.S.-Mexico relations, and you're seeing that across these lines where people are having to adjust to what the president says and then what the administration is actually going to do and accept thereafter.
So this is the back and forth between posturing and policy, and you really kind of have to wait to see the whites of policy's eyes, and then we talk to Mahaffee and figure out whether that's got a snowball's chance or not, because some of the policy seems audacious and just, I mean, kind of wild stuff at times. I mean, think about the audacity of suggesting that we buy another country because there's a good ROI. I think we can make this make financial sense for the U.S., and therefore I'll buy the country. Okay, maybe that's a great idea. Maybe it really is. I mean, I'm not against it, but who says stuff like that? Who really and means it? Well, wait a minute.
I mean, when we're talking about Greenland, President Truman suggested spending about $100 million in gold in 1946 to buy it from Denmark because there wasn't any value for it. So there is a geostrategic argument behind Greenland in terms of the GIUK gap. So Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom gap, which was a Cold War environment to keep the Soviet submarines bottled up in the Arctic Sea. Greenland is a source of potential resources for hydrocarbons and rare earth elements and critical minerals. And it's also the northeast and northwest access point for the thawing Arctic ice. So there is an argument to be made back there behind this. Now, is he going to use force of coercive measures? Likely not. Is Denmark going to be willing to give it up? Likely not. But it's an interesting indication of the framing of discussions and where the president's thinking might be at the moment.
What should we pay attention to from this president, Josh? What, as you listen and try to filter out with your very intelligent and experienced ears, what do you think we need to watch?
I think the interesting thing is going to be how the Euro-Atlantic and NATO situation as it relates to Russia and Ukraine relates to the Indo-Pacific and China. I think the NATO question, having 32 members is an unwieldy alliance. You're already seeing the domestic political disruptions within a number of countries affecting their ability to meet their obligations, but also come up with a coherent response for Ukraine and long-term Russia relations. You're also seeing a replication of a lot of the long-standing concerns as you get away from the Eastern. It's actually a front, not a flank. With Russia further west, so Spain and Portugal have a different threat perception than the Estonians and Latvians and Lithuanians, naturally. The president is going to want NATO to do more and be more responsible for European continental security. Why? Because they have seen the United States paying a great deal of money into subsidizing European defense, allowing European economies to enjoy a higher standard of living than perhaps they otherwise would. And you also have an administration coming in that wants to do the Indo-Pacific and confront the strategic competitor of China. So how those two things are linked and what the Europeans do in response to President Trump's requests and how the president responds in the Indo-Pacific is going to be, I think, a very key indicator of the direction of the country's foreign and security policy.
Okay. Trump says we're going to end things in Ukraine. Does he do it? What happens with Ukraine? Give me quick answers here if you can. What happens with Ukraine in the first year or two of Trump?
That's going to be a very interesting question because I think you're going to see a lot of dynamics that are outside of the president's control. If we look at what's happened in the last year, Russia has retaken about 4,200 kilometers of Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainians have pushed back into the Kursk region of Russia, but they have also lost about 1,400 kilometers of the territory that they've taken. So there's this push-pull situation where Russia is on, unfortunately, a advancing position, and Ukraine is on, unfortunately, a retreating position just by sheer numbers of casualties, losses, and a lack of equipment. President Biden just sent, I believe, about another $500 million worth of equipment forward to Ukraine, the last package they're likely to receive. When we look at President Trump's policies towards Ukraine and Russia, we don't know actually what they are. We have indications of what they could be, most notably because of Lieutenant General Kellogg and the America First Policy Institute, which said that they will make continued aid to Ukraine contingent on Kyiv entering into negotiations with Russia. The second part of that, which people don't read, is that in the event Russia does not enter into negotiations or does so in a hollow manner, if you will, they will flood Ukraine with weapons. So it's going to be interesting to see, because part of the thing that people forget is Russia has a say in this, and Putin doesn't see any value in entering into negotiations at the moment. Now, does the president have the capacity to increase pressure on Putin and force him to the table? That's going to remain to be seen.
Well, I think the president clearly has that leverage. Okay, the president has the leverage if he decides to use it. But he's had this, at least the impression is he's had this long-going bromance with Vladimir Putin. And is he really, has he changed his mind enough, or posture or position, or enough to step in and say, all right, damn it, I'm going to be president of the United States now, and you're going to toe the line? Is he ready to be that guy?
I think President Trump, more than anything else, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, wants to have a good deal. I mean, let's remember this. President Trump sees himself as a businessman, and you can agree or disagree with that, whether you're successful or not. But the reality is the only thing worse than no deal is a bad deal. And I think if the president enters into negotiations and it is framed as such where, hey, Mr. President, if this goes south and goes south badly, this could be your Afghanistan, August 2021. If this goes badly and Kyiv potentially ends up in the back foot and Ukraine is long-term destabilized for European security, this will be bad. I don't think the president's going to want to take that first deal. He's going to want to look tough, and he's not going to want to have a failure. If you look at Lieutenant General Kellogg, this is the man who's served in combat, who is the special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, and is a hard-nosed individual. If you look at Ambassador Whitaker coming in, he is somebody who understands the challenges of getting NATO across the line to increasing defense expenditures, but also ensuring collective defense, collective security. If you look at Waltz coming in as the national security advisor, Green Beret, again, somebody who is not a fan of Russia at all. Same thing with Marco Rubio. So I think if you look at this ecosystem of individuals who are coming into the key positions, the president will certainly set the tone, and whatever his, as you said, in potential inverted commas, bromance with President Putin. But the business of government that's going to happen behind the scenes is not pro-Moscow at all, and doesn't want to see a destabilized Europe, and Ukraine is central to European stability.
You're describing a very strategic, measured President Trump. And I don't remember that guy from the last administration. Josh, I think in the past, President Trump could be lost a bit from his message in the heat of the moment. He would go off of script in the heat of the moment, and could sometimes even derail his overall point and goal and aim. So you're kind of describing a new President Trump, and do you really think you're going to see one?
I'm going to point to two key examples that I think are interesting that people don't really pick up on. The first one, Speaker Johnson was trying to get through the Ukraine aid package through Congress last year. Now, he flew down to Mar-a-Lago shortly after Lord Cameron went from, on behalf of the Conservative government of the United Kingdom, down to Mar-a-Lago as well. And after Mike Johnson met with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, there was a press conference. And President Trump could have easily turned around and said, you know what? I don't want any more aid to Ukraine. This is a bad deal. Don't pass it. He didn't say anything, but he said, Speaker Johnson, you're doing a good job, which gave him the top cover to get that bill through, which otherwise he may not have been able to do so. The second one, shortly after President Trump was in the Oval Office with President Biden, to sort of hand over the handshake in the Oval Office, the announcement of the ATACMS extended range strikes into Russia was announced. Now, what we've heard from General Kellogg and coming out of that meeting was that President Biden briefed President Trump on this decision, and President Trump could have easily said, "Nope, I don't want that." But it looks like the decision was made to increase pressure on Russia. Now, these are two very small data points, but it's interesting to look at specifically as it pertains to Ukraine and Russia, about the president looking to get maximal pressure onto Kyiv and Moscow.
All right, I'm going to cut through, Josh. I'm going to cut through because I'm out of time and I apologize. But you're telling me that we're going to get a more measured and perhaps strategic version of Donald Trump here for this go-round.
I'm going to say you're going to get an administration, I think, and I hope, is going to be more strategic and more measured. President Trump's bombast and hyperbole and press conferences, you're going to expect those. But what's going to happen behind the scenes and the people within the ecosystem that are there, I think is going to be a lot more interesting and a lot more measured than people are initially expecting.
Okay, quick questions now, rapid fire. Will the war in Ukraine be still going on at this level 12 months from now?
TBD. I'm not sure.
In the next 4 years, second question, will China go into Taiwan?
Again, TBD. I'm not sure.
Go give me some odds then.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how the situation in Ukraine plays out and what that says to China and Taiwan. If the
50,
United States...
50? No. It's odds. 50-50 they go in over the next 4 years? More or less?
I think it is. I think it's probably less. I think it is.
Less
I
than
would
50-50.
say.
Okay.
I would say less than 50-50.
Okay. A year from now, Israel, Middle East, is that quieted down and changed significantly a year from now? It feels like it's changing.
I would agree. I would say your odds are better than half on that one.
Anywhere during the Trump administration, finally, do we deal directly with Iran, and do we curtail Iran in any meaningful way? Those are two separate questions. The second one's more important.
I think on the former, I don't believe so. On the latter, I could see that happening, yes.
Okay, that's it. Joshua Huminski from the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, a great scholar and expert, and we thank you so much for being with us and hope you have a wonderful 2025.
Oh, thank you so much, and I hope I'll be back across the year.
We hope you will too. Thank you. That's it for another FarrCast, ladies and gentlemen, as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. A little bit longer this week, but boy, Huminski didn't let us down, folks. Didn't let us down. 3 great segments. That was terrific. Harry, that was a good one. Flag this one in the can. We'll send it out to all the media outlets. They're always asking us for more FarrCast. Everybody is. What are you going to do? I guess we're just going to have to give them more FarrCast. We thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. For Harry Jennings, our producer, for everybody at Hightower and Farr Miller in Washington, thanks so much. We do hope that 2025 is wonderful for.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of the FarrCast. Thanks to our guests, Jim Iuorio, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Joshua Huminski. And thanks to you, our listeners, for all of your support over the past 8 years and carrying us on into 2025. Please share us with friends and colleagues as we continue to grow our audience. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it is not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And if we can be of assistance, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com. and I'll be happy to put you in touch with one of our investment professionals to help you navigate your financial course. We are grateful for all of your notes and comments and try to respond to as many as we can. Please keep the emails and messages coming. Take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. And we'll be back with you next week on the FarrCast. Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, and a SEC registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.